Welcome to Venture Step Podcast, where we discuss entrepreneurship, industry trends, and the occasional book review. We're going to be continuing our series with Meta's release of Llama 3.1. Last week, we touched on Meta's AI Studio, where you can make an AI agent. 2 weeks ago, we talked about the release of the models and what it means to have an open source foundational model in the market now. Today, we're going to be breaking down half of the research paper that they created called Llama 3's Herding of the Llamas, the Herd of Llamas. Herd of Llamas is the exact name of the model. In this model, they break down how they went about the architecture, how they discovered what size model they need, what tokens should they use, like what is the spread of content, like long context, short context, coding, non-coding, multilingual, how they went about troubleshooting issues and solving those things, root cause discovery of why their system was erroring out during training phases. And it is quite in depth. It talks about the algorithms used as far as filtering or how they went about deduping data. It goes into using other research papers that they use to solve, like citations. They cite OpenAI several times. They cite other people. And it is quite extensive and quite dense. I read 46 pages, and that includes quite a bit of graphics. So probably around an actual amount, maybe 26 to 30 pages worth of data, or not data, but like actual pages, like no images. And it took me about 3 hours because it is just so dense. It's dense information. I don't know everything, obviously. And so some things I have to look up, read another paper to understand what they're talking about in this paper. And you know how it goes. You get down this super long rabbit hole of like reading other papers that are related to other papers of the paper that you're related to with context wise. But today's focus of this first half is going to be talking about just a quick review of the herd of llamas and what is that, like the different models and the capabilities, the foundational model, like what is a foundational model, and then we're going to be talking about the pre-training and post-training. So, and then safety. Those are the three things that were touched. But in that, there is a various of topics within each section. And so I would describe these sections to more or less be like 20 chapters of a book. Like one section is like 20 chapters of a book. And this is me cutting everything down into like a condensed like manner instead of trying to populate in this podcast everything that I deemed might be important. I try to just cut down as much as possible without losing what we need to have a productive conversation. And I would like to emphasize to read the paper yourself. I'm definitely not an expert. I'm not a scientist. I wish I was sometimes. And I'm sure there's not that many people that on a Monday night, they're like, oh, I'm going to spend 3 hours to read half this paper. And so other people might find it curious or might be curious of the paper, or they just might want to know more about these AI models and like what's behind the scenes and how does this stuff work, or you're just curious. But I do think that there should be an emphasis on obviously utilizing these models. And I don't think that you need to have a crazy amount of understanding, but it is nice to have in your back pocket to understand like all the work that goes into creating something like this. And then the thought of someone providing to you all this information on a silver platter in a paper with all the links to the data they use, not their data, but open source data that they supplemented with their proprietary data that they collected and scraped off the internet. the papers that they use to come to their analysis, the thought process, the way that they troubleshooted, the systems that they had to create, and things that they did analysis on, things that they would do in-house versus out-house. And the thought of having all that stuff put into a paper for you so you can study it and apply your own methodologies and use their open source model on top of all this other stuff. I mean, it's just awesome. It's so cool. It's so cool for a company to provide this information for free and allow people to use the model for free. I just think it's super cool and should be emphasized in this podcast episode is like what Meta's doing with open sourcing their research and their model is huge. Like it hasn't been done before to this scale. And it's super cool. And I'm curious on how everything plays out because it's a great model. It's on par with ChatGPT 4.0. That being said, it's open source and the licensing for this model is open to everything. So it's free use. It's a free use license. So that means that you could use it for enterprise. You could copy paste the code, repackage it as like Dalton's LLMs, and there you go, or venture step LLMs, and then I can make a business out of it. I could just copy and paste the work. I mean, and contribute it to be mine, or I could change the model just a little bit and make it mine. Or it's just super cool. I spending some time, a couple minutes to emphasize that before we get into the podcast episode. So now we're transitioning over to the Herd of Models, which is the name of the paper. The Herd of Models is 3 models. It's the 8, the 70, and the 405 billion. And those are the amount of parameters. So it'd be 8 billion, 70 billion, 405 billion parameters. And parameters are like, call them weights. I mean, you'd have parameter weights, but just think about it as like different scales. So if you had like a room and you had 8 scales lined up, and maybe they're measuring different things on different scales, basically, and they all have different weights and importance to the final outcome. And so they have this 8 scales in your room, and they are measuring different things, and then the final outcome is the combination of all these different weights, and that's the end result. And that's how I would explain it, is like they act independently, but their scores are aggregated, I guess. I mean, in a very simple way. So it uses the tokens, provides a weight of the context of the tokens, and it could be the attention of the model is given, token, a sequential token, like a group token, or there's a whole bunch of different tokens that you could have. Like the way that the model gives attention to the tokens, there's a whole bunch of different ones that we'll talk about a little bit more later and how that was set up. But just the emphasis is that there's parameters, the model does stuff, and yeah. Okay. So that being said, the models are quite good. 70 billion and 8 billion are best in class, meaning that they are better than all the other models across the board. 405 billion, Meta's first foundational model, is about like, second to third to first. It's majority of the time tying the best models and then winning or tying. It doesn't lose very much. I think it wins or ties like 70+% of the time, and the rest of the time it loses on these different benchmarks that I'm not really going to touch on because you could read them, you could read about them, and figure out what they mean. Okay, so the foundational model that they did, which is the 405, was trained on 15 trillion tokens. 15 trillion tokens is a lot, obviously. And the way that they went about creating a high quality corpus, and a corpus is just say it's a group of texts, like a book, or it could be many things, but normally it's attributed to unstructured data. And that is, I got a message on WhatsApp. I don't know how to mute that. This is quite in mid podcast too. Maybe if I mute, I don't know. It's too much to figure out during this episode. So you might be getting WhatsApp notifications. That's not you, that's me. Sorry about that. Okay. That was quite distracting. Sorry about that. So it's the 15 trillion tokens that they trained on. But out of those 15 trillion, they cut it down. Like the 15 trillion is the final set, but they had more. And so they did a deduping process. And so they did a deduping by the URL. They did deduping by the document level, which uses mini hash mute chat for 8 hours. Cool. Okay, so you shouldn't get any more notifications. It sounds, because I was getting them. And maybe AI takes that out. I have no idea. We're just going to go with it. So document level dedupe, use the mini hash algorithm to dedupe across the entire document. Line by line deduplication. Their parameters was if it appeared more than six times in a bucket of 30 million documents, which is a lot of documents, and that's really tight parameters, really tight. And then they did domain deduplication, and they also removed domains with known adult content. So if I backtrack a little bit, what they're talking about is they scoured the internet. They built a HTML scraper. So that goes on to the internet, scrapes documents and text and whatever nonsense you can get a hold of, and then pulls back all the information to Meta. Meta runs it through this text extraction and cleaning methods. And so it takes the unstructured data from the websites. Like, think about it as a tree, and this is how it's normally described, like a tree. And then of that tree, there's different levels within the tree. So a tree on like a map, like a family tree, you have your parent, which is the website. And then the website could have different pages on that website. So you might have an about section, products, or research, or whatever. And so these different sections have data on them. So, the first part of the data set for one website would be the website URL. And then from the website URL, it would go to the about section, pull all the data in the about section. Okay, so then in the about section, there's data. And then the about section might have different links or whatever linked to the about section. So before you know it, you're like 6 sections in from the about section, and then you repeat that same process for different sections of the website. Once you do that, you have this tree-like data set that's tied like basically as like a dictionary. Like you have the domain, and then the domain is the key to all these other sections, and the sections are populated from the domain. So they look at, the URL. Okay, if we have multiple URLs, just throw it out. All right, let's look at what's in those URLs. If we have repeat information, throw it out. If there is line by line duplication, throw it out. Okay, last thing, is there any domains that have adult content? Oh, they do. Throw it out. And so it sounds simple, but it's quite complicated and very time consuming. Once you build it, then it's done, but there's always going to be things that don't get caught, and then you have to edit it. And so depending on how severe the things that you don't catch are, you might have to redo your work. And the issue with unstructured data is finding use out of it, and LLMs have done a great job doing that. But to extract and organize unstructured data is quite time consuming, and it takes a lot of time to test and come back and test and come back. And it's basically just an iterative process where you do something, test it. Oh, that didn't work. Do something again, test it. That was somewhat good. Do something, test it. Oh, that looks great. All right. And then you move to the next thing. All right. So now I need to worry about this. And then you repeat that process maybe X amount of times, depending on how complicated it is and how familiar you are with the topic, because different topics have different things that you need to emphasize. And yeah, it's a repetitive process of test, repeat, test, repeat, test, repeat until you get to the result you're looking for. But aren't a lot of things in life like practice, like you're practicing to be a better speaker? These episodes, I'm doing an episode every week to become a better speaker and a better podcast host and try to learn every week. It's pretty much the same thing. I'm just doing a test, repeat, test, repeat. Some episodes are good, some episodes are bad. So training for a sport, you're not good right away. I mean, there's many things that relates to, but in a general sense, it's quite time consuming and it is complex. Okay. So now that we talked about how they took out the information that they didn't want, let's talk about the model architecture. So the model architecture mirrors the Llama 2 architecture, which they used a dense transformer architecture. And in dense transformer, it utilizes a very simple architecture that emphasizes self-attention. It has a self-attention mechanism to allow the model to weigh the importance of different words in the input by generating the output. So maybe I'm not explaining that well. So it looks at the words in the input, right? And it does an analysis of all the words in the input, and then it containerizes or contextualizes, the words in the input, and say that, I don't know, I went to the bank to fish, which is actually an example I did in my AI class. Where are they going? They're going to the bank. So if I just said I'm going to the bank, you could be going to the riverbank to fish. You could be going to the bank to deposit money. Like, which bank are you going to? If I said I'm going to the bank to fish, then okay, so you're going to the bank to go fishing. That makes sense. And so what it's saying is like, okay, where you're at and where you're going, it's going to give emphasis on the important words in your input to generate an output. So if I said I'm going to bank to deposit money, then it's obvious I'm going to the bank. If I'm going to the bank to fish, I'm going to the riverbank to fish. But what if I just said, I'm thinking about fishing, and then I ask the AI some questions. Then I go in there and say, oh, I'm going to head out to the bank. If it doesn't know the previous output and input, then it wouldn't know the context of where I'm going. It would just say, okay, like whatever. But since it knows, okay, the output and the input that they emphasized last time, the weights that were used for the last input regarding the fishing part, and the next piece with the bank, then it knows, oh, I'm going to the riverbank to fish. And it's like, okay, good luck fishing. Like, hopefully you get something. And so that was the main part. There's a different approach that they could have, which is called the mixture of experts, which is basically training each section of the model as like an individual expert. So you have like a coding expert, you have a test expert, you have a, I don't know, text to speech expert. And you have all these different experts that you combine into one. And then that one expert would handle certain things. So you might have a reasoning expert that does does logical problems for you or helps you walk through complicated problems step by step. And the mixture of experts is very powerful and efficient, but the issue is with training large models, it is difficult to scale up and it is prone to instability. That being said, there was some decisions to use the transformer architecture that allowed Meta to focus on, and this is what they did for Meta 2 as well. So just bear in mind that allowed Meta to focus more on the training and less on the instability of training a model of this size and scale, because it is already complicated enough, and to add to that already very complex problem, it is a difficult proposition. And that's what they emphasize in the paper. They're like, managing complexity. They said, hey, like, this is super complex thing that we're trying to do right now, and the easiest thing to do is to try to minimize the level of complexity. And to do that, let's pick the transformer architecture. And so the transformer architecture is what they picked versus the mixture of experts. The transformer architecture is also the architecture that OpenAI uses, that they reported to be using. And just overall, it just allows for less worry. Later in the paper, they talk about like 78% of the issues that they had were hardware issues, with just things timing out, with things not necessarily overclocking, but like GPUs failing because they didn't have enough RAM allocated to it, or just a various of things that just make it super hard. Like the architecture part is the most difficult, I think, because that's where all the issues were coming from. And so they knew that, okay, from the previous training, that they had a lot of issues, and from all these other research papers, they had a lot of issues with architecture and managing that, and making sure that there's low latency and efficiency, and the ability to group GPUs for large burst training sets. To do that on a scale of like 10,000 GPUs is very difficult. And to manage the power to every single GPU and make sure that they maintain at 700 watts, it's a complex problem in itself, not even counting in that you're managing like 15 trillion tokens. And so what they did makes sense, but yeah. Okay, so instead of using the mixture of experts, they used the transformer architecture. How do they find out how big their model should be? So the meta team provided some documentation regarding the methodology that they utilize. They use the scaling laws. And so scaling laws is a way for people or companies to understand what's the optimal size of your model given your available compute resources. And so it's like a formula you plug in, and you say, okay, like, I've got this amount of compute available, and this is my training set that I have. What should I do? And so the training laws determined that, hey, like, for your foundational model, it should be 405 billion. I think they said 403, but then they put it to 405. So they're a little bit over the optimal compute size. And then it was similar for the 8 and the 70. They were intentionally trained longer, than a longer duration than that would be considered compute optimal. But it's like, it's not a surefire way to approach it. From what the paper was saying, like, it's like best practice, not really best practice, but it's a guide. Think about it as a guide. And it's not necessarily a rule that they stick by. And so for their 70 and 8 billion model, they trained them longer than they needed to, just to improve the model for inference speed. So if you train it more than it needs, that training will improve the speed of the outputs and allow it to perform better and faster. That's how I would describe it. Like, it performs better and faster. And so it's not necessarily most optimal for your resources, but that's not what the scaling laws are emphasizing. It's emphasizing, okay, what's the optimal size of a model given your compute resources and the amount of time to train it. So for their 70 and their 8, they trained it longer than they needed to and didn't follow the scaling laws in order to make the model faster and better. Okay, so that makes sense. And they also used the 405 to train the 70 and the 8 billion square model. And they did so in a manner of like having a model-based filtering of the data, having the splitting the model out and allowing for the code and data reasoning, and having multilingual data in there. And they had a determination of this data mix that they had. And so their final data mix, and I'll read it off, is 50% of the tokens are corresponding with general knowledge, 25% of them are mathematical and or reasoning tokens, 17 are code tokens, and 8% are multilingual tokens. And if you're not familiar with tokens, tokens are tokens are game tokens that you can turn in at your favorite game store. No, tokens are, I would say, a unique key that is put in for an input. So think about a token as like a number, right? Like a mathematic token. So the reason why these models have tokens is because a model can't read text. So if you feed in a model like THE, the model doesn't know what the is. So what you do is you tokenize your unstructured data. And once you tokenize your data, it turns your the into like a number that the model can read. And the machine learning will understand that going to the bank or going to the riverbank is something the model can read after it's tokenized. But if you don't tokenize the data, then it doesn't work. So there's different ways to tokenize things, and they have different effects. You can tokenize per letter, you can tokenize per word, you can tokenize per phrase, you can tokenize per vowel, or there's hundreds of ways you can tokenize. They're better at different things. Like, if you tokenize per word or letter or phrase, it depends on what you're trying to do, obviously. So it's like one of those cliche answers is it depends on what you're trying to do. And so I don't know how they're tokenizing things. It doesn't say in the paper, but I assume that they're doing a various of different types of tokening. And I don't know how you token code. I've never done that before. I've only tokened unstructured data in the sense of like it being words or research papers or like, just general stuff like reviews, those kind of things, or Twitter, like tweets or YouTube comments, 4chan comments, those kind of things. I've never tokened like code or these other things. I have tokened some multilingual comments, but yeah, as far as how they token mathematical and or reasoning tokens, I'm not sure. Like if it's a math problem, like how do you tokenize like a math form? I don't know. I don't know that one, sorry. But so they talked about some of the challenges that they had with this large language model. And some of the things that they did was they did group query attention, which is a query that they group by key value pairs. And this would allow for, there's some computational benefits, but it allows for like it allows for further refinement of what's being tested. And that refinement allows them to either have more computational efficiency or easier to decode. And so they did many different attentions. So the model is a diffusing. Okay, so it uses, just want to make sure that let's find it. So it's an auto-regressive decoder, and it has a dense transformer architecture for their model. And so it uses the dense transformer as a self-attention mechanism. And so they're using these other mechanisms on top of the self-attention. So self-attention is what we talked about earlier. It's about using the input and each word in the input sequence to every other word, allowing the model to capture relationships and dependencies on the input to correspond a reasonable, well thought out output. And then there is the multi-threaded attention, which, corresponds to allowing not only one input, but many inputs to be grouped. And then on top of that, then it makes the group pairing, like the key value pairs, which is the group query attention. And then on top of that, it uses attention mask, which is, say that I uploaded several documents. Well, this is for the training set. So just bear that in mind, like they're training the model. So attention mask is when you upload, I keep saying when you upload because I'm thinking about it from a user perspective, but we got to think about we're training this model. So in the model, we have many documents and they might be related, right? So one document might be talking about how to train your dog to sit, and the other document might be about like training your dog to sit and fly or something. I don't know. So in this context, it wouldn't allow for the tokens or it wouldn't allow the model to emphasize information from both documents at the same time. So it wouldn't cross-pollinate, basically. So it doesn't allow for the model to utilize multiple documents. And this is used to improve long contextual questions and answers. So if you're asking about a document, it doesn't automatically go to a separate document that might be somewhat related, but not the same thing as what you're talking about. And it prevents this attention to multiple documents in a sequence, if that makes sense. So it prevents many documents from being accessed and used as the output when they're doing the training to prevent these different documents to being used. I was trying to say like that without saying documents, like text, forms. I'm not sure. Okay, so the next step would be annealing the data, which is the final step of pre-training and fine-tuning. And the annealing the data is basically when they slowly starve out the model's learning rate. And so the learning rate might start at like, say, 50. And if you don't know what learning rate is, it's like how fast they allow the model to learn from the training data. And then they test it. And there is a learning rate that's optimal for what you're trying to do. And basically these different learning rates affect the model differently and how fast you learn. It takes less time to train, but then it might have issues with, recalling everything. There's a various, it's quite, just this learning rate thing is a complicated topic on its own, and it could be its own podcast episode. So I'm just trying to touch it on the surface. I understand that if you're listening, you're like, wait, that's not all that entails a learning rate. I gotcha. I'm just not trying to go there right now. Okay, so just think about it as how fast the model can learn. A faster learning rate, learn more stuff, takes less time, doesn't learn as much. Slow learning rate, learns more stuff, takes more time. Okay, so you want to find a middle ground, because if you learn too fast, then you're not learning everything. If you learn too slow, at a certain point, you're not going to learn anymore. Like if you study a math problem for 20 hours, it probably would have been all right to study for 2 hours on that math problem. Like after 2 hours, you're not learning anymore. And so there's a balance of, like how much time should you study on one problem? Okay, so 2 hours here, an hour here, an hour here, an hour there. Okay, so all in, I'm at like 15 hours instead of spending 20 hours on one problem. And so you want to find this middle ground between how fast you learn and the amount of time it takes and how deeply you learn. That's learning rate in a nutshell. Very, very light summarization of that. But basically, they reduce the learning rate gradually, until 0. And I'm pretty new to this topic and I had to look it up, but you run your set through, like your data through, your training data through, and then you then reduce the learning rate to, and then when you do that, it curates a data set of exceptionally high quality examples. So annealing the data allows for subtle adjustments to the parameters based on high quality data. It creates high quality data set. So it finds the high quality data, allows for these, these subtle changes. It provides high quality data. It creates a checkpoint. And so this checkpoint would be saved. And so they'd save these model parameters. So they do this annealing, and then they would save the checkpoint and they would save it like, okay, so they did their training. They'll do a save and they'll save the parameters of the model. And then they'll keep training on some different stuff. And then they would go do that training, then they would save it, and then they would kind of compare the different changes that were made at the checkpoints of the training of the model. Yeah, my notes got a little messed up there. I copied and pasted my note, like from my notes, I wrote them down on a separate place that was not as organized, and then put them in here, but I copied and pasted them twice. But anyways, so what I found pretty interesting was they were talking about the compute budgets. And so they were saying these things called flops. And so it's 10 to the 18 and then 10 to the 20 times 6. And flop is a floating point operation per second, which comes out to sextillion, which is 21 zeros, which is crazy. 6 is a lot. It's so much. It was hard to, I mean, I don't even, it's hard for me to even understand what 6 stallion is. I had to look it up. I knew it was big, but I was like 21 zeros, and you look at it against a billion, and a billion is 9, right? 9 zeros versus 21 zeros. Yeah. So it was crazy, absurd. But anyways, so they had that, and so that was basically, they at the end they do this annealing, which is, they reduce the learning rate to create high quality data. They have the checkpoint averaging, which is saved constantly throughout the day with the different types of training runs that they have. They run all that stuff, save it, but what is running it? And so the compute that they used was 16,000 H100s, which is, I think, like $600 million or $800 million worth of GPUs that they are utilizing to have these AI workflows. And the servers are Meta's Grand Tinyons AI servers. And each server contains 8 GPUs and 2 CPUs. Then they are within a server, the GPUs are connected with an NVLink to, like, basically it's like a high speed connection between the two GPUs. And then they have a job scheduler, which is also made by Meta, which is their MASC, which is Meta's global scale training scheduler. So within just like this architectural piece, they open sourced their, the server racks. Like years ago, like a long time ago, there was a company that had a monopoly on the server racks, and they were like absurdly expensive. Meta designed something similar, and then they open sourced it to drop the price of all the server racks. And so they have the server racks they open sourced and designed basically themselves, like a long time ago. So their server racks, their GPUs is like from NVIDIA, but the servers themselves are Meta's. Their job scheduler is Meta. Crazy. I mean, and then they built the web scraper themselves. Then they have their own file system. Their file system is the Tectonic file distribution system, which has a throughput apparently of 2 to 7 trillion, not trillion, that'd be crazy, 2 to 7 terabytes per second. And they notated that the challenge with their file storage system was the requirements of having this like bursty checkpoint nature of the writes to the system, to the file system, where like large amount of data needed to be saved quickly, which would saturate the storage system. And so they always did this checkpointing to save the model's process or progress. And the checkpointing was done in case of failures, because there was quite a few, not that many with all the things going on, but it was quite a few. They have a document within they're not a document, they have an infographic within the research paper that breaks down the root cause of every single time that there was a failure, which is pretty interesting. But when you add it all up, it's only a couple hundred. And granted that they have 10,000 or 16,000 GPUs running, which I guess each what did they say? They said each server has, I don't know, 8 GPUs. So 10. I mean, I could have done that easily. So they have 2,000. They have 2,000 servers. So that puts us at 18,000. And then they have 2 CPUs. So they have 22,000 different pieces of hardware that they're managing for this whole training. And then also this system apparently provides 240 petabytes of storage across 7,500 servers equipped with solid state drives. And by the way, something I didn't know about solid state drives, if you have that, and your computer has a solid state drive, make sure to charge that computer or turn it on like once a month. If not, your data might get corrupted from your solid state drive, because the data is stored on the drive, and the drive doesn't like write the way that a hard drive does. And so if you don't charge it, your data could like disappear. By the way, I didn't know that, so I figured I'd just throw that out there because I learned it last week. I was like, wait, what? That's crazy. What? How is it a hard drive then? Well, it isn't. Well, it's a solid state drive, but you know what I mean. So just throwing that out there just in case you might need it. Okay. So we're moving from the post-training, or actually the last thing is that I think I said it earlier, but 78% of the interruptions were from confirmed or suspected hardware issues, which you can find in the section 3 of the paper. Okay, so post-training of Llama. Post-training of Llama would, refer to just the data pruning section, enhancing the code capabilities, a multilingual expert training, and then the challenges of mathematical reasonings and the methodologies to improve reasoning, and the challenges and solutions in long context handling and knowledge probing techniques. And then after that, we have the safety first, ensuring responsible AI. And then we're done. We're almost there. So that one section took us 48 minutes. And so I was telling you, like, this is a seriously dense paper. And there's just so much information to go over. And this is after I cut it down. But okay, so data pruning. They talked about a couple sections of their data pruning. So they had topic classification, quality scoring, and difficulty scoring, and semantic duplication. Okay. So topic classification is pretty easy, where they just, like, this is a math problem. This is mathematical reason. This is, mathematical reasoning with geometry, mathematical reasoning with trigonometry. And so it allows a better distribution of the data. Quality scoring was they used a reward score that would rate the accuracy of instructions or answers to questions and then it would be fed through with higher scores. So like it would score things, the model would, and then it would be reviewed and then ran through. If it was scored high, it would be utilized. There were some pieces where you would try to reduce redundancy in the training set and remove things that weren't necessarily important. And so one of the things that they did was they removed data that was excessive, like emojis and exclamation points. And I remember when I was first using Llama 2, Llama 2 would really, for some reason, just like lay it on you for emojis and like really kill you with emojis. They loved emojis. And so I think that they got that from obviously social media, because people use emojis on social media a lot more than normal. But yeah, I just loved emojis and exclamation points. And so they, in this current, they removed some of that, and they also removed overly apologetic phrases like "I apologize," "I'm sorry," because it is kind of weird when the model's like, "Oh, I'm so sorry, my king, don't hurt my family," or something like that. I don't know. Some of these models can be weird, and they're like crazy sorry about like little things. It's like just like you're blowing this way out of proportion. Like it's fine. Let's just move on. You're making this weird. Okay, so they, for enhancing coding capabilities, what I thought was pretty cool is that they made a coding agent that coded basically, and then fed that data over to their model. So they created this kind of expert trainer, and this was like this code expert model that trained and continually trained on a large data set of code. And then this code was then used to annotate high quality, create high quality annotations from human code, or vice versa, take annotations from humans and then code for finer, like for great, fine tuning. And then they did synthetic data generation for just different coding pieces, and providing feedback on what was made, and creating new code snippets or logical walkthroughs on how to create the code, and just providing a way to evaluate itself with its own synthetic data. And then it would create like a problem description. So it maybe takes the code and describes the problem with the code, or takes the problem that someone's having and then writes the code for it. And then it takes, the correctness of the code, analyzes that, and analyzes the code for formatting, for syntax, all sorts of things. And then after all of that, it does self-correction. And then this stuff is fed into Llama. Llama is given like a whole bunch of training data from this code expert, because the code expert's super good at coding. And then Llama learns how to code. But one of the interesting pieces was it was having issues with Llama was having issues with code that wasn't as common, obviously. So like there's a lot of Python, there's a lot of Java out there, but what about like a niche language? So their solution was to translate code from those uncommon languages into common languages. And that allowed the model to understand, okay, like if you ask about these uncommon languages, like I guess like it's not really uncommon, but like if you did Rust or like Julia, if you did Rust or Julia, that might not know right away. But then if you did this translation to back into the problem where you translate the uncommon code into common code that it has a good understanding of, then it understands, okay, like this is that is this, and then it could write the code for you. Okay. So then they had multilingual training. Multilingual training with, we're just saying that we're not, when we're talking about training, we're talking about post training. So they're editing the what was originally trained, and they're kind of collecting outputs and understanding what needs to be changed with the model. Okay. So Multilingual, they were trying to emphasize they didn't use synthetic data for this multilingual set. They try to use a diverse set of languages and cultures and male and female and just different backgrounds to allow for a wide range of language inputs, like because people might have might have knowledge in one language but might write it separately or speak a separate different way. I mean, everyone understands this concept of like accents and different vocabularies that are utilized from different areas of the world, blah blah blah. And so that they didn't use synthetic data to ensure that they didn't have biases, and they wanted to reflect real world use cases and what's going on with the language in that respective place. And just in general, they use multiple languages from various viewpoints to train the multilingual piece. And so they did the same thing with the coding. They made like a multilingual expert, and that multilingual expert trained 90% on non-English like languages. And it kind of did the same process as the coding, and then trained Llama, and that's how Llama knows how to, understand. If that makes sense. I kind of went into detail in the coding piece because there was some nice snippets from the research paper that I could easily recall, and I quite enjoyed. Okay, so the next thing is challenges of mathematical reasoning. So in here, they talk about mathematical reasoning. And so there is a couple of things that are a big issue. Lack of prompts. There's not many complex like math prompts that are out there. Lack of ground truth of thought. Incorrect intermediate steps in teaching tool usage and or training inference. Let's break this down. So lack of prompts. These mathematical prompts aren't easy to come by because they are complex, and the amount of prompts and or formatting for math questions greatly decrease as the complexity increases. So they have an inverse relationship on supply. It's difficult to have the model reason in these complex math problems when there isn't that much data to train it on. So it's like the chicken and egg thing. Like it can't really solve problems because of the lack of prompts, and it doesn't have a ground truth because of the lack of prompts. But to get more prompts, it can't necessarily make its own prompts because there's not enough data to train it to make new data. And then there's not enough data to train it on to have a good foundation on how to go about these problems. So there's these, issues with, having the right chain of thought and the intermediate steps. And then there is a training inference disparity where, things that are fine-tuned might not work perfectly in the real world. And then there's this tool teaches usage, which is the tool usage for these LLM models or these large language models or multimodal models, which is what pretty much everything is becoming now. They used to be LLMs, but now they're multimodal. These multimodal models have what's called tool usage. So they'll have a training data set, and this is the easiest example I could think of. There's two that are pretty straightforward. The training data set for this is up to, I think, 2023 for 3.1, Llama 3.1. But you could ask it things that are from the world. Like you can ask it, can you tell me what the stock price of Meta is as of August 2024, August 11th? All right, I guess let's do the 8th or something like that. If we did the 8th, it would be able to pull back that information. How does it do that? So it uses an API from Brave browser. And I'm not sure why they use Brave, but they didn't really talk about it. Why? They use Brave. And so it uses the API, looks up the information and gets the output, like, and goes on websites or whatever it needs to do using Brave. That's a tool. So it's calling in, you're calling the model, say, hey, like, I need something that's real time. I want the stock price August 8th, 2024. The model recognizes, hey, I don't have this information. Where can I get it? I can get it from the internet. Okay, cool. So it goes to the internet, pulls it back. Okay, here's the information. There's another one where for these complex coding problems and mathematical reasoning problems, they kind of go hand in hand. For some of these things, like the scientific things, it would pull up, like, if you asked it a problem, it would pull up a code interpreter and create code to help solve the problem. So it makes this code interpreter to enhance its reasoning capability. That's the tool usage. So they had to build that functionality to allow the model to better understand the mathematical reasoning problems. Okay, so the way that they went about fixing these reasoning issues with coding or with the mathematical reasoning coding, they made their own coding expert. For the mathematical problems, they converted the pre-training data set into like question answer format. And so they converted all that data from, unstructured. It's still unstructured, but they structured the unstructured data into a question answer format to create more data and to allow the model to easily understand what's going on. So question answer instead of like a big long context. They had a improvement to their reasoning. So they used the model to train itself into generating a step-by-step solution for each of these prompts that then were filtered and verified for correctness to create a high quality training set. So they took the lack of prompts, made this question answer format. Then they took those question and answers, used Llama to make a step-by-step prompt, like a step-by-step solution for the prompts that they gave it. And then the humans filtered it out and only kept the high quality ones, which was, manual. And then they got rid of the ones that obviously they weren't that good. And then they opened it up to code and text reasoning. So then if it's text, they could use the tool that they created with the coding inferencing with the code interpreter. And then if it was text reasoning, they were able just to go about like solving the problem, like thinking through. And then from there, the last thing they did was they had human feedback of the model and prompted it to correct its mistakes, improving the ability to learn from its errors. So humans gave it feedback on things that it was wrong on, and then the model was able to correct the output for those things, and then it helped the model understand what was an error and what wasn't, and overall help the model understand errors and improve itself in that manner. Okay. So that was that. So the next challenge that they had to solve was solving for long contextual handling, or I guess for solving for long text contextual like inputs. And so there is a lack of prompts, obviously. Like there isn't that much. It's difficult to obtain like high quality long context information with human annotation because, hey, like it's super time consuming to format and to annotate like these texts. It's quite time consuming. People don't want to do it. So what they did for long context is they heavily relied on synthetic generation. In synthetic generation, they did something similar for the oh my gosh, so caught up on this. They did something similar for improving the mathematical reasoning, where they did question answer and then they added in summaries. So they did question answering similar to mathematical reasoning. They did summarization, and then they also did code reasoning. So they basically reuse the same architecture of the mathematical reasoning for long context handling. And because they are kind of similar, because you need a logical thought process to handle mathematical problems. You normally need a logical process to process long context. So they're somewhat similar. They initialized their synthetic generation in, as I said before, they used the question answering, summarization, and code reasoning. They tried to balance out like short and long context between synthetic long context versus the original short context. And it was thought about to be at 0.1%, like both short and long. So there's not that much like synthetic long context, but I'm assuming the ones that are long are pretty long because the context window for Meta is 135,000 tokens, I'm pretty sure. So yeah, it's quite interesting, I think, in that regard. So now we're going to move over to safety. So I skipped over some stuff, but now we're going to move over to safety. And safety is something that's brought up a lot, right? So these multimodal models are becoming very good in a short amount of time. And so there's a large emphasis on safety, and especially when you're doing it open source. So one of the key winners, or like not really a key winner, but key aspect of what closed models are pushing, like, hey, like we're closed model, like if something bad happens, we can just shut it down. But if you're open sourced and if people are going to do bad things, they're going to be able to do bad things because it's out there. So there is a whole team of people at all these companies, especially at Meta, where they do uplift testing, which is like to evaluate whether new technology, emerging technology like this Llama 3.1 model could allow individuals or groups to perform tasks, particularly the ones that could cause risk. And does it not only does it allow them to perform it, but increase performance? So significantly increase their capabilities in those tasks. Can they do that? And then they also do red teaming, which is kind of similar to uplift testing, but a red team is just like a group of people within the company that are trying to break the model. And in this case, make the model do things that it shouldn't be doing, like make like teach someone how to make a chemical weapon or create like crazy advanced viruses that you could get on someone's computer and run it and take down a system, take down infrastructures, those kind of things, make a nuclear weapon. Those kind of things are the events that the uplift testers and the red teams try to prevent. And they have a whole bunch of benchmarks that they talk about, and the overall findings were they didn't exhibit any significant vulnerabilities. However, there were some concerns that were identified from internal and external audits. So insecure code generation. So what they mean by that is the code that's generated is good, but the code can sometimes be broken and make models susceptible to malicious code. So large language models are susceptible to those things. So you could make the model, like force it eventually to do things that it shouldn't be doing. You can do prompt injection, which is like playing a game with the model to break over, or I guess game the system of the model and convince it it's doing something it's not doing, but it's doing it. And so like you kind of force the model to do things it shouldn't be doing when it normally wouldn't do those things if you were asking in like a straightforward manner. But like if you're playing like a game with the model, it may not fully understand what the actual outputs are. It just understands it's playing a game with you, and then it's making things that it shouldn't be doing. Spheres, I think that's it. So they have code generation, code generation with that being of generating these malicious code, the prompt injection, They also have phishing attacks on there, but they noted that the 70 billion model had higher success rate of convincing the model to make a phishing attack versus the 405 billion. And then there were some notations of cyber attacks. Not too familiar with what it was on there. My notes don't say, but it said that they had, capable of network resistance. So it was fine. I mean, if it was something that they were super concerned about, obviously the model wouldn't have been published. So I don't think it's a big deal. And it was notated that they had insignificant uplift from Llama 3 to 3.1. And so we're good there. So this podcast episode was quite in depth, where we discussed the architecture of Llama 3.1, the problems that they solved, how they went about their pre-training, their post-training, what methodologies were utilized, what algorithms, overall just different issues that they had. And it was quite dense and quite complex, which I would definitely agree with you. If you're nodding your head right now, my head was a little sore after reading all those pages and writing out the notes, which took a long time. But I hope that when you're discussing these things with yourself internally or with your peers, you have a better understanding on what these models are doing and how are they built under the hood. And when you're doing these certain things, understanding, okay, for these long context handling models, it's trained on question and answering. So try to break it up in question and answer format. Okay, it's trained on summarization. Okay, when I have long context, let's ask for a summary. It's going to do well with a summary. Or understand, it's trained for code reasoning. So it's trained for managing and reasoning over like large code repositories. Okay, so when I'm asking for like long context, those are the three things that it's trained on doing. So the model should know how to do those things very well. That is a snippet of information that is very valuable. So understanding how these different sections of inputs are trained will allow you to better utilize these models in a fashion that you haven't been able to do before, nor of your peers. So you'll have that one step up. And it's also, I find, very interesting. But it also is important, as I said before, is like once you know how it's trained, then you know how to utilize it. So if you're doing the same things it's trained to do, then yeah, you should get pretty good results. And I think that's important, right? At the end of the day, we're all trying to save some time. And so this podcast won't necessarily save that much time, but it might save you some time over time. I don't know. It's hard to say if everyone utilizes this information. Last snippet, and maybe I should have said this in the beginning of the episode. I am at not 1 year. I'm at half a year of consistently posting, which is pretty cool. And it seems like there's an uptick in subscribers that I'm getting on YouTube, which is very nice. I was surprised. I was like, wait, did someone like share this post with someone, or like what's going on? It's quite confusing why there's so many people subscribing, but I don't mind it. It's pretty cool. And once again, I appreciate the support that you're providing in, helping me share this to the world. And I hope that you find use out of this content. I know I do, because I get to learn a lot. And I hope that you're learning with me and that this information is useful, like it is to myself. And hopefully in the future, I continue providing useful information, right? So that's not a guarantee either. It's not a guarantee that you keep listening, and it's not a guarantee that I keep providing useful information. So we're both unsure on those fronts. But I do want to thank everyone for continuing to listen in every week. It's very, very nice. And I really appreciate you. And I hope that we can just keep learning together. That being said, what are your favorite parts of the episode? I personally love the architecture part, where we go over the different architectures and like why it was the way it was, and the way that they went about filtering, because I've had to do something at my work that was related, kind of similar to this, not necessarily as complex, but some of the filtering ways that they filtered out and deduped data, which is quite interesting, and I think will be useful for the job I work at. When I have to work on another NLP project, I'll try to utilize some of the approaches that they used. And yeah, I just thought it was super cool. And I think that's something that I can apply in my day-to-day life when I get another project like that. But once again, yeah, comment what you think is interesting about this video. And of course, if you want, you could like the video, subscribe, do whatever you do. I mean, it doesn't matter if you don't listen. It doesn't matter if you listen every time. I'm still thankful for every single listener. And once again, have a good day, good morning, a good afternoon, a good evening, wherever you are in this world. I hope that you enjoyed listening today and that you listen again next week. Because next week we're going to be discussing Google's Pixel. I don't know, Pixel built by Google, the built by Google release, made by Google release. I don't know what they called it. Whatever. It's the Google showcase with all the products, and they're going to announce some AI stuff and AI integrated products and some just general announcements regarding the Pixel brand and some AI advancements, I'm sure. Have a great weekend, week, day, whenever you're listening to this podcast, because when the internet has no sense of time. So you'll be somewhere out there in this world. And I hope that you'll be out there again next week. See ya. Bye.